What's up, my little pretties? It's your mistress, the Queen of Lions here, and today we are back with another episode of Shadows and Pretties. So, with that being the case, I know it's the last time I did a video talking about this topic, this series called Telltale: The Walking Dead. I did season 1 plus the 400 days a couple episodes ago, so if you guys want to check that out, that feel free to. So, the last episode I talked about was Princess Mononoke, which was episode 63, and today this is episode 64. So, with that being the case, today I am going to be talking about, well, The Walking Dead season, you could probably say season 2. Now, I did talk about the first season along with the 400 days, back in episode 60. So I thought, you know what, I'll cover this topic, which is the second season. So, with that being the case, I'm going to warn you guys right now that if you haven't seen The Walking Dead 2 or if you haven't played the game, I highly recommend you, leave this video if you haven't done so. So, with that being the case, there are some different choices and stuff like that. So, I am going to be explaining about the summary about what it is actually about for those who are new to the channel. Now, the Shadows and Pretties, for those who are new to my channel, I basically review movies and games. So, now in this one, now season 2, has 5 episodes in this, and it continues the story of Clementine, who is a young girl who is orphaned in the undead apocalypse, left to fend for herself after Lee died in season 1, which I did mention that. She had been forced to learn how to survive in the world gone mad. So, of course, this one, it takes place many months have passed since the events of season 1 of The Walking Dead, and Clementine is searching for safety. But what can an orphan child do to stay alive when living can be just as bad, but sometimes worse than the dead? So, of course, Clementine, when you play as Clementine, you'll be tested for certain situations, hard choices and that. Like I said, with Telltale, this is like the choices you make. Like, whenever choices you make could lead to, good situations, bad situations, neutral ones, or, there are consequences, whatever it came to whatever choice. So, with that being the case, with all the choices that have been discovered, it would be, long for me to sit there and go through all single choices, but there are certain choices, that are hard, and there's going to be some that are going to be difficult to make, especially when it comes to, certain situations. So, now the first episode is All That Remains, which takes place several months after season 1, the final episode called No Time Left. Clementine is traveling with Omid and Krista, who assumed that they reunited outside of a savannah, stopping at a public restroom next to Gil's pit stop. So the trio explains the names of Krista's unborn child before deciding to clean up. So when they headed to the female restroom, Clementine puts her gun down and begins to clean herself when she accidentally drops a bottle of water and heads to the stall to retrieve it. But of course, she ends up meeting a girl named Michelle, who is a stranger, retrieves the weapon. But when Clementine accidentally makes a noise, of course, Michelle tries to get her out, but holds her at gunpoint, demand that Clementine hands over her possessions. Omido eventually enters the room and realizes what's going on, and he stealthily approaches and sneaks to Michelle, but of course the door closes loudly, causing Michelle's startledness to, turn and shoot and killing Omid. Krista runs into him meanwhile when Michelle immediately drops a weapon and apologizes, but Krista, of course, kills her by shooting her in the abdomen, of course, just to get revenge over what happened with Omid. So, of course, this scene cuts to 16 months later, where Clementine and Krista, who is no longer pregnant, are seen to be around the campfire, attempt to cook a weasel while they caught and hunted earlier. So, of course, they had, moves and plans to head to Wellington, where Krista believes it might be a safe zone. So, a lot of people don't know is, what happened to Krista's baby. Well, it's either she had a miscarriage or maybe the baby died before birth and then or after birth or something, which is kind of, pretty I guess you could say that's kind of believable taken to an extent. I'm not really sure what happened to Chris's baby, but you guys could provide your theories in the comments below, because I would love to hear your theories. So, soon as Krista heads off to look for some more firewood, Clementine was tend to the fire. So, of course, she finds a other half of Lee's photo, and of course, it's torn off in a new day, and looks upon it sadly, before finding her old drawing of Kenny, Kutch, and Duck. And then, of course, before eventually she found a lighter, which she uses to make a fire. So after viewing one of the objects at her disposal, or failing to do so, Clementine hears a noise from the campfire, and she finds Krista being held at gunpoint by two bandits, who demanded to whatever she was with someone with her. Given her the option of sneaking away or throwing a rock at the bandits in order to distract them, Winston chases after Clementine and then attempts to restrain her, although she is able to break free. Yeah, tough Clementine there. By pushing Winston out of the reach by a nearby walker, which then grabs and eventually kills him, while Clementine approached by several other walkers. Now, of course, back away in fear, Clementine falls into a nearby river and is taken downstream by the current until she passes out. So the next day, when she wakes up on the banks of the river, and then she, after a brief trek through the woods, she then encounters a dog named Sam, who, alongside an abandoned campsite, who presumably had once belonged to Sam's owners. So after a brief search around the area, Sam begins to bark at the walker tied to a tree, with a knife sticking out of its arm. So Clementine remembers for some words Lee told her before his demise, is she beats it with a large branch and then retrieves a knife, which is sharp. And there was also a trash can full of food, and Clementine eventually finds a can of beans. She uses the knife to open it, and Sam will begin to beg. So after the choice to feed him or not, Sam attacks Clementine by biting her in the arm, and of course, or as Clementine stabs or punches or beats Sam multiple times until she is pierced by the metal frame in the torso and the hind legs. So Clementine has the option to kill Sam or leaving him to die. And, when seeing, Sam, the dog going through pain, it's like really sad. See, every time I see dogs die in, games or movies, it really makes me sad, to be completely and utterly honest. I'm sure it does to you guys. Clementine eventually heads off in the woods until almost passing out from the exhaustion in the woods, only to realize she's surrounded by walkers. Attempting to flee, she's almost overwhelmed by a walker until Luke and Pete save her and carried her off. They notice the wound on Clementine's arm. However, Luke instantly assumes that it's a walker bite and begins to discuss with Pete over what to do. However, Clementine tells him it was a dog bite, but of course they were still skeptical, continue arguing if they should leave her or not. Pete eventually decides to give her the benefit of the doubt and then take her to the cabin. Of course, she's been told that she can see by their doctor. Again, exhausted in the wound, Clementine passes out and eventually stirs to wake up the people arguing with what to do. Not noticing, resemblance to Kenny or anybody else, Clementine is intentionally surprised when she causes an individual to reveal to be Nick to become startled and accidentally fire off their gun close to Clementine. But after arguing with the group over herself with the wound, Clementine is examined by Carlos, who is unable to determine whether she was bitten by a walker or a dog. Immediately, the group decides to temporarily hold Clementine in the shed until the following day, so they could see whatever she would develop a fever or associate with the infection. So, despite with Clementine's requests for her wound to be treated or before it worsens, she decides to go find the supplies and treat herself. So she uses a hammer to break through the board, and then she escapes the shed, and she has a choice to sneak into the cabin through the gap of the patio to make her way outside the trapdoor, or tap on the window, catching Elvin's attention. So when she persuades Elvin to give her some supplies as well as a juice box, once inside, you could eavesdrop on the group's meeting. She still finds them hard to decide whatever to do with her, but of course, she heads upstairs to find some various rooms, including old rags and stuff like that in the bathroom. Whenever she's able to acquire a needle and of course is forced to hide after hearing someone approaching. She notices Rebecca, who is pregnant, and worried herself identifying her baby before leaving. Now, Clementine then heads down to the other bedroom to notice that Sarah, another girl, who is discovered by this, who she willingly offers to help Clementine despite the friendly interest in her. Curious of whether she was her friend or not, she offers a bottle of peroxide or something, which was normally used her dad to treat the cuts, and that Clementine asks that she doesn't tell anyone that she helped her. Of course, when Clementine goes back to the shed, she painfully disinfects her wound with the peroxide before using the needle and while sewing her injury back up with fishing water to stitch her wound. Of course, she accidentally drops the roll of rags on the wall, and when she goes down to get it, she's eventually grabbed by a walker, who have been distracted by her cries of pain and grabs her by the foot. Breaking its way through the hole in the process, climbing Maine to attack her, the walker attempts to bite Clementine as an unfamiliar manner. Sandra had attempted to bite Lee in, well, you could definitely guess, the first episode, but it is knocked out back after Clementine hits him with a brick. Before she's used it to push it back and impale it to a nearby anchor, before it could be able to pull itself, Clementine eventually grabs a hammer and begins to, well, beat the walker's head with it. So, of course, that gives Lee a flashback of killing Sandra in the previous season, just as the others burst into the shed after hearing it. Of course, Clementine's allowed back in the cabin after some brief argument amongst themselves, before her wound was examined and bandaged by Carlos. Carlos then said to Clementine that he should stay away from his daughter Sarah. So with that, Clementine could apologize or not, making Carlos say she's forgiven, by Elle saying that Carlos is the opposite. Luke then comes in immediately with Carlos with some food that appears that they have changed their skeptical attitude towards her. So, of course, the two make their conversation where Clementine is given the opportunity to join in. Of course, she did mention Lee in her past in her lessons. Of course, Nick returns to the room to apologize to Clementine for their outburst earlier, but is prompted and revealed to Luke that Nick's mother had been previously killed by a bite victim, and they had been allowed back in the group. Of course, when Nick leaves and Pete comes in, Clementine talks to, well, Pete and everybody else, saying that Clementine shouldn't get too comfortable with the group. Of course, the following day, Clementine and Pete are seen out in the woods on the fishing trip, where Pete talks about Nick's childhood and how Nick catches up with them and stuff like that. However, they all really see that there is like an individual named Carver who may have been responsible for more, well, deaths and lots of other stuff. So it looks like they had bad experience with them. So, of course, with that being said, Clementine discovers her backpack next to the bodies and realized that it was the body that is still alive, belongs to one of the bandits who had previously attacked her and Krista, injured and weak. The bandit asks for water, which Clementine gives the option to granting his request or refusing. So, of course, Pete isn't attacked and bitten on the leg, although he claims that it was merely he lost his footing, and the same thing, the walkers attack Nick. But Clementine is forced to either save the two. If she saves Pete, she'll eventually get off the fight, but it really depends. So, that is the case. I am going with Pete because that's where I went with him when I played the game. So with that being the case, yeah. Now that was episode 1 of season 2. So we're going to be discussing episode 2 of season 2. So in episode 2 of season 2, called A House Divided, the episode starts off with the walkers, well, pounding against the door of the truck or cabin where Pete or Nick hide. So, well, with Nick, you're in the cabin, but if you save Pete, you're in the train. So, of course, Pete will ask Clementine to hand him a saw to cut his leg off due to the bite, but then he decides not to, believing that he would just bleed out and Clementine wouldn't get him back to the cabin. So they have to spend the night. When Clementine wakes up to find a weakened and dying Pete, after the conversation, Clementine can convince Pete to say goodbye to Nick and go with her. So, of course, he leaves with the truck, but Pete is left convinced, so he will distract the walkers to allow Clementine to escape. When Clementine reaches the cabin, where she meets Carlos and Rebecca sitting at the dining room table, they ask where Luke and Alvin are, revealing that they have left to go look for them. After the two gathered guns, Carlos asks Clementine to look after Sarah while they're out. So as Clementine, does certain things, she starts spending time with, Sarah, and, Sarah takes her photo, and they goof around for a little bit in the cabin. However, a man will enter the cabin after he knocks on the door, and Clementine will ask questions, including one where she could say her name is Carly. Yeah, Carly's from season 1. And the man then zooms around the cabin, asks the group of Clementine where he's staying with. So, of course, Clementine was trying to avoid some questions, and after he believes Sarah's seen something, he better go check it out. Of course, Sarah has ended up hiding under the bed where he goes up there, but nearly been caught before he leaves. If a picture is taken, the man will discover it on the floor, and soon after tells Clementine not to trust the group, but of course he leaves. Of course, Carlos and Rebecca and Luke and Alvin return to the kitchen entrance to find that Clementine and Sarah to tell them what happened with the man. before the group left, it was Carver and who was looking for them. So, of course, Luke and Carlos tell the group that they have to pack up and leave for North. Along the way, Rebecca speaks to Clementine with a nicer tone from the previous conversations earlier. When they came across to where Clementine was with Nick or Pete last, if Clementine was with Nick, they would stay inside the cabin alive and well, and if Clementine was with Pete, the group will eventually find his body, his stomach torn up, and his intestines all over the place. So yeah, Pete eventually dies. So the group continues to walk, and it cuts to 5 days later where the group come across a bridge. So Clementine and Luke clear a path on the bridge, proceed to kill a few walkers, with Luke nearly falling into the river. And nearly crossing, the duo comes across a man with a rifle who proceeds to ask questions. The man lowers his guard before they were friendly and offers them food until Nick comes up far behind and believes the man will kill, Clementine and Luke. Despite Clementine and Luke's efforts to stop Nick, he shoots the man in the neck and he falls into the river. The rest of the group, however, crosses the bridge, and Alvin asks Clementine to help search for the small cabin for any food. Of course, they did that, and of course, Clementine comes across a hunting knife, which she pries open a chest with some food in it. Alvin will walk and ask for the food for Rebecca to keep her knowledge, and the food to stay quiet from everyone else. Of course, the group noticed a small herd of walkers crossing the bridge, and they ended up leaving. When the group reaches to a ski resort and notices someone in reinforced after Clementine checks the view in case of any followers, she saw some flashlights near the forest and the bridge, as she notices the group was being confronted by another one. She goes through the group to find Kenny, who is still alive, with his new girlfriend Sarita and his other friend Walter. The dispute instantly settled after they see Clementine and Kenny returning. After catching up with Kenny and helping Sarita, the gang having up somewhere for Christmas ornaments, they were talking to Walter about dinner and about talking with Rebecca about the baby that they'll be served. Will pick it up if whoever wants to eat it. So, of course, with that being said, the group you choose to sit with, you'll talk about everything, like normal people would do. So, of course, with that being said, if Clementine sat with, Luke and, of course, Nick and Kenny, and of course, Clementine explains that Duck was his son, and yeah. So Walter begins to speak with Clementine outside for now, and he believes that there is still salvageable stuff, and speaks out of his partner, Matthew. After Kenny joins the two, they see a woman peering through the resort from outside, and they're wondering if she's trustworthy. They ended up going over to her and give her a large box of food to help feed her family. Going back inside, Luke tells Clementine that the man on the bridge was Walter's partner, Matthew, and not to tell Nick or Walter. So, of course, Nick walks up and discovers that the man who's killed and you and Luke were going to be, getting into an argument. So with that being said, when the walkers were going on, which of course the windmill begins to spin more faster because of the storm, they had to shut that off. So as they were shutting it off, the Carver and his group then eventually approaches in and, holds everyone hostage. So if they surrender, Alvin and Clem will be sat down. But of course, if Kenny snipes one of the man, with that being said, Carver has the opportunity to kill Alvin. So Clementine does have, the option to either escape to find Kenny or stay with, the others. So of course, Carver ran himself with the others and took all the survivors, and they ended up going into, his community, which was pretty, toxic in a way. So, In Harm's Way, which is episode 3 of season 2. The episode starts off with Clementine alone with the others in the couch, but of course, with that being said, they were in this, truck, and they ended up, the Carver takes them to their a lodge or something, where Clementine is being forced to do certain things. So, of course, they ended up, going through, more some stuff, and, the Carver's, sitting there and making them work and doing a bunch of stuff. So, with that being the case, and with that being said, eventually, later on, we do see that, Clementine and the others have to make an escape. So, of course, the group has to sit there and start, trying to figure out how they could escape. So, Clementine starts making, the instructions on, going through certain things. But of course, they get new people named Mike and Jane to help them. So, of course, with that being the case, they even tried to start going over to see if they could figure out anything. So, of course, Clementine will, do some things to try to get, she ends up sneaking around, trying to, take certain things to try to, get the group to escape. However, Carver does eventually get his just desserts, and he gets beaten up by Kenny, who eventually they ended up taking. They ended up taking off into the woods, and of course, Carlos is eventually shot by a neck by one of Carver's guards, who mistakes him for a walker, and of course, it gets eaten by the walkers. So Rita eventually gets bitten. So you have a choice to cut her arm off, or you cut the walker's skull. Well, you basically, do that. So they eventually escape, from Carver and his, minions and all that. So I have no idea what happened to them after that. They most likely escaped, or they could have probably died after running out of ammunition. Who really knows? So, in episode 4, Amid the Ruins, which basically starts off with the episode, takes place, they're ended up in this, like, little ski lodge, ski resort, well, not resort, but, like, the ski area, where Kenny becomes angry at Clementine, blaming her for what happened to Sarita, and tells her to stay away from them both. Clementine will have to choose whether to ask Sarita to end her suffering or persuade Kenny to leave. So, with that, depending on the choice that is, and we're gonna sit there and say when the group are in this little Parker's Run or something, and of course they were just, Rebecca begins panicking. So it takes place after, season 2, episode, 3. They're stuck in the forest, and, Rebecca gets left behind. So Jane gets Clementine and Rebecca out of the, herd of walkers because, it was getting more and more crazy. So with that being the case, Clementine and Rebecca and Jane reach to Parker's Run, where they find Bonnie and Mike waiting for them, and they discuss that Nick and Luke and Sarah are yet to arrive at the meeting place, and that Kenny is still staying by a nearby seemingly broken. So Mike states that Kenny flipped out when he attempted to talk to him. So Clementine tries to talk to him, and of course, at first, he becomes increasingly hostile and forces Clementine to back out and leave him alone. So she returns to the others and say that he just needs time alone. Which I don't blame Kenny for, losing anybody like that. You could probably be, angry at times. So yeah, that's very understandable why Kenny got angry. So eventually later on, Rebecca ends up having, contractions and that, which they assume that Rebecca's starting to go into labor. So Jane and Clementine go to, the lodge to see if they could find, Luke and Sarah, but they end up can't finding them there. So they eventually go to the trailer park, and of course they end up finding out that, Sarah and Luke are in one of the trailers. So they eventually break in there. Eventually they get the walkers' attention so they can get in there. And once they do get in the trailer, where they have a choice to save Sarah in there or leave her to die. Whatever choice that is Clementine and Luke and possibly Sarah, depending on if you save her or not, they escaped from the trailer, and they ended up escaping and going back to where, everybody else is. So with that being the case, we eventually finds out that when Clementine, and Jane go on the bench, they discuss somewhere they could give location for Rebecca to give birth. So of course they ended up going to what seems to be an observation deck, and that's where they agreed that Rebecca will be in there out to give birth. So they eventually run into this dude named Arvo, who basically, has medicine in that. They have the option to take it or not. So if they do take it, Clementine will use it eventually. So once they find a really good place, Clementine returns towards the museum with Bonnie and Mike, and they eventually find water and, and they eventually finds a coat and some other stuff. So as they return, Rebecca ends up screaming in pain as a herd of walkers are approaching by. They realize that Rebecca's in labor and she's going to have a baby. So they ended up taking Rebecca and everyone else to the observation deck. And that's where, Kenny helps Rebecca give birth to Alvin Jr. or AJ. And that's basically how, it all happens. So with that being the case, as Rebecca gives birth, they ended up naming him Alvin Jr. or AJ for short. So of course Clementine starts bonding with the baby, and things started to go well because they ended up leaving the wharfs the next morning. But of course Luke argues, claiming that Rebecca is in no state to travel and they should leave after a couple of days. But Kenny decide whatever the option is taken. But before they head out, a small portion of the deck, they find Jane escaping. The two eventually find a final conversation, with Jane giving Clementine a useful advice about survival. So, of course, with that being said, then when the group decides to leave, they head north to the location, but as that was going on, Rebecca becomes weak and collapses, and she eventually becomes a zombie, which, of course, Kenny or Clementine ends up shooting Rebecca. Now, of course, Arvo, who is the man who asks where Jane is, and of course, Clementine explained that they left. Arvo believes it's a trap and causing the group to run hostile and became close to, and that's when a bunch of people speaking Russian pulling out guns and attempt to attack the group. So, with that being said, that leads over to episode 5, which is No Going Back. Now, this is the ultimate episode season 2 that involves with Clementine, going over to save, AJ, which that's what I picked. And regardless of Clementine's choice, Luke eventually gets shot in the leg. However, Kenny eventually, kills a few people. So when the group all were safe in that, they all, of course, the Arvo eventually gets captured by Kenny, and Kenny eventually says, "You better leave the group right now." So he then leads to the injured group into the forest until nightfall, where the group discovers an abandoned power station where they decide to spend the night around the fire. So after scouting the area with Jane, they end up returns, and which she returns, and the group orders to tie Arvo up, insisting that the rushing is not to be trusted. So they do that. And held him up like hostage, like a tied up animal. So later on when more stuff was going on that day, the next day eventually shows up where the group sets off to find Arvo's haven, which was a long period of time of walking. Of course, Arvo is held at gunpoint when Kenny is attacked by a zombie behind. After Clementine saves him, or he saves himself with a bullet, the group eventually reaches the frozen lake, which there was an unfinished house across the lake. So, of course, they started to go across the lake, but however, with that said, Luke ends up being stuck on top of thin ice with cracks surrounding his feet. So Clementine either can, cover Luke or go and help her. So with that being said, Clementine goes to, save Luke, but of course she falls into the water, and of course she gets dragged. Of course, Clementine can see Luke getting dragged by a walker underneath before Jane pulls her up. And of course, Clementine gets frozen, and they go inside the house to build a fire to keep Clementine warm from getting hypothermia. So with that said, Clementine, regardless of her choice, she could either help, the other choices. So if you played The Walking Dead, you would probably know the choices. So Clementine eventually, sleeps with it, but when she finds out that Arvo, along with, Mike and Bonnie, were about to escape, she eventually, starts screams and waking up everyone else about, that they're getting robbed. So Clementine eventually wakes up the back of the seat to see AJ, Kenny, and Jane. After the rest of the group, Kenny and Jane start arguing about the safest location to go to. So, of course, the argument goes on and gets heated when Jane tells Kenny about everyone hated him and feared him, including Sarita and his past family. So, of course, Kenny gets, offended, and Clementine is left alone in the blizzard, with the group split up with the blizzard beginning. So Clementine is left alone wandering aimlessly with the walkers until she finds a stop where Kenny was hiding in. Jane arrives without AJ, which of course Kenny thinks that Jane was the one who killed AJ or something, so they get into the argument. So you could there is a total of 5 different endings you can receive from your decisions. So of course, Clementine has a choice. So of course you could definitely say you and being with Jane, you go to Howie's Hardware with AJ. So you could do that. Oh, of course, there's one at Wellington where being with Kenny and AJ, or being alone with AJ in an unknown location. Throughout these endings, there are constants of survivals that both Clementine and AJ were revealed to be alive, along with Jane's or Kenny's death, whatever for choice you pick. So That was actually season 2 of The Walking Dead Telltale. Now, what did I actually think about this story? I actually found this one to be rather interesting and well made. It was pretty well done, to be completely and utterly honest. When I first saw this, when I first played this game, I actually really loved how the story went to continuation from season 1. It's like really good, it's a good continuation from, what happens with Clementine and all that. It's like a really good story. Like, I love how Telltale, continued on with Clementine's story because this was obviously really well done and made. So, I definitely have to say, this is probably one of the longest episodes I've done because this is like over 30 minutes. Well, just over 30 minutes. So, with that being the case, I'm going to sit here and wrap up, the Shadows and Pretties episode. So, I actually found this season to be rather cool. The episodes are really well made, really well detailed. I like the characters in it. It's flat out amazing, to be completely and utterly honest. So, that is actually why I actually found season 2 of The Walking Dead to be just as good as the first season. Although there might have been some things that kind of reminded me of season 1 a little bit throughout this, but other than that, it's actually a pretty good, concept with this. So, with that being the case, what did you guys think of this season of The Walking Dead? Did you all enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this season a lot better? Leave me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section down below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you happen to be brand new here on this channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to when I upload so then you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out of here. And I'll be catching you all in the next video. So peace out, everyone. And as always, roll the outro because oh, wait a second. Scratch what I said about outro. Man, there's no outros when I do this. My God. I don't know why is up with my brain today. I guess maybe it's because I feel a little tired. Could be why my brain is all jumbled up. But anyways, I'll be catching you all in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, peace out.